Even Russian military propagandists no longer hide the fact that the situation in Toretsk remains critical, and reports of its complete capture do not correspond to reality. According to Z-War correspondent Kotenok, Russian troops are exhausted, and Ukrainian forces are actively counterattacking. The Russian military correspondent admitted in his report that the situation in the area of Toretsk and Pokrovsk is far from successful for the Russian armed forces. According to him, if earlier Russian forces declared the encirclement of Ukrainian positions, now the situation is mirrored. Only small assault groups of 3 to 4 people remain on the front line. The war correspondent also noted that the Russian army is no less exhausted than the enemy, and the Ukrainian forces, realizing the shortage of people in the Russian troops, have stepped up counterattacks. He emphasized that the enemy has realized that we have a shortage of forces, and is becoming brazen in a number of areas. Using Toretsk as an example, the Russian war correspondent admitted that official statements about the capture of the city were premature. Despite the cheerful reports about the liberation, Toretsk turned out to be filled with gray zones, unclaimed Ukrainian strongholds and basements in which Ukrainian armed forces soldiers may be located. So we got it back, the war correspondent admits with regret, pointing out that the situation is reminiscent of the failure near Kupiansk, when the Russian army liberated Kruglyakhovka only on paper, but in reality Ukrainian forces continued to control part of the territory. It is clear that the Russian army is having serious problems holding on to the captured territories, and its forces are exhausted. Ukrainian counterattacks and competent defenses mean that even in places where Russian troops are trying to gain a foothold, their presence remains precarious and vulnerable. Recall, Russian forces have intensified their offensive in Kursk Oblast, particularly in the so-called Ukrainian bridgehead. Reports also suggest that Russian forces have made gains in Sudza, where they are receiving reinforcements from North Korean units. Ukrainian military sources confirm that up to 2 battalions of North Korean soldiers operating near Sudza exhibit high combat readiness and coordination. Former Russian prisoners, who have received minimal combat training, are being deployed in this area, Ukrainian intelligence said. Additionally, reports confirm that Russian forces recently crossed the border from Kursk Oblast into Sumy Oblast, advancing toward the southern outskirts of Sudza. A Ukrainian soldier operating in Kursk Oblast said that Russian advancements are largely enabled by North Korean reinforcements and the extensive use of FPV drones with fiber optic guidance. High-stakes talks between senior delegations from Ukraine and the United States on how to end Kyiv's 3-year war with Moscow opened in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. According to Associated Press, the talks reflect a new diplomatic push after an unprecedented argument erupted during President Volodymyr Zelensky's February 28 visit to the White House. Ukrainian officials told the Associated Press on Monday that they will propose a ceasefire covering the Black Sea, which would bring safer shipping, as well long-range missile strikes that have hit civilians in Ukraine, and the release of prisoners. Journalists briefly entered the room to see the two sides as the meeting got underway at a luxury hotel in the Red Sea port city of Jeddah.
Yeah. Scroll. 했어. 맞죠?
High-stakes talks between Ukraine and the United States have started in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. According to Associated Press, journalists briefly entered the room to see the two sides as the meeting began at a luxury hotel in the Red Sea port city on Tuesday. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio smiled for the camera, while Ukrainian officials sat without expression at a table across from them. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister was on hand for the talks. American, Saudi and Ukrainian flags stood in the background. Officials answered no shouted questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, media.
Mr. Yermak, what do you hope to accomplish today?
Thank you, media.
Advisor Waltz, we expect weapons to be turned back on.
Are you hoping to get a ceasefire?
Secretary Rubio, are you open to a partial ceasefire?
Thank you, media.
Secretary Rubio, Sky News. Do you think you'll get a ceasefire?
Saudi Arabia is to host talks on Tuesday between the United States and Ukraine in a new diplomatic push after an argument erupted during President Volodymyr Zelensky's February 28 visit to the White House. Associated Press journalist John Gambrell in Dubai explains the importance of the Ukraine-US talks taking place in Saudi Arabia. The oil-rich kingdom may seem like an unusual venue for talks aimed at smoothing over relations after the blow-up. But Saudi Arabia, under its assertive Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has been positioning itself as an ideal location for possible peace negotiations between Kiev and Moscow, and even the first face-to-face talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump. U.S. and Ukrainian officials will meet after the Oval Office meeting between Zelensky, Trump and U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance descended into an extraordinary 10-minute argument before journalists. Trump at one point admonished Zelensky by angrily saying, "You're gambling with World War III, and what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country." Zelensky ended up leaving the White House without signing a deal that included granting the U.S. access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals. Kyiv hoped that deal would ensure the continued flow of U.S. military support that Ukraine urgently needs as it battles Russia in the war that began after Moscow's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Zelensky plans to visit Saudi Arabia on Monday ahead of the talks. He earlier delayed a trip to the kingdom after traveling to the neighboring United Arab Emirates, which also has been considered as a possible venue for peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead the American team for the Ukrainian talks and meet with Prince Mohammed. Since assuming power in Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed took an aggressive posture both at home and abroad.